I am very late to this party, but finally got to read Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This book is quite divisive. Some people love it and it's their favorite book, while others hate it. Whenever there's a book that a lot of people love, I find it helpful to read it to understand why people love it, because I want to understand the experience people have and why they're having it. After reading Nevernight and watching some reactions, it feels like most of the reasons why people hate this book are somewhat trivial. So I made a numbered list to go over those and talk about them to help people who haven't read this book yet manage their expectations, and also to help people who might want to give this book a second chance. But first, what is Nevernight? Nevernight is an adult fantasy book with assassins. It's about a 16-year-old girl, Mia Corvere, whose father gets killed by the government when she was 10. She's then taken in by someone who prepares her to get into this famous assassin school so she can take her revenge. Most of the book takes place at this assassin school. She also has a special ability where she can control shadows, and she has a shadow cat companion called Mr. Kindly who can also speak. Nevernight takes place in a universe where there are 3 suns, so it's, well, never night, literally. Basically, the nights are called never nights and the days are called turns. Like every 2.5 years or so, there's actual darkness, and that's called true dark. This brings us to the first point that a lot of people complain about this book. How do I really know about the terminology for the day structure in this world? No, it's not really shown in the book how this odd sleep cycle affects the daily life of the characters. There are footnotes. I don't think I've ever read a fiction book with footnotes. This book has footnotes. You need to make your peace with it. They exist. I was really frustrated at first. I was like, how dare you add footnotes in a novel? This is just lazy writing. Then I realized I was just being a child. It's just footnotes, guys. It's really not that big of a deal, and as I kept reading, I actually understood the point of the footnotes. First of all, if you really hate the idea of footnotes, you do not need to read them. As a matter of fact, I recommend you just skip them in your first read, and if you really like the book, then you can read them on your second read. The audiobook just reads them wherever they are, and my ebook copy had them at the end of the chapters. The first function of the footnotes is additional info. A lot of fantasy series have companion books with extended lore. What this book does is just gives you the companion book in the footnotes. There's a bridge with a weird name. Here's why it's named this way. There's an expensive wine. This is why it's expensive. It just helps you learn more about the world. If you like additional lore and fantasy books, I would expect you would actually enjoy these footnotes. If you find that kind of thing to be distracting, you can just totally skip them. However, the second function of the footnotes is a bit more stylistic. They are kind of funny. There's a lot of character in the way they're written. They lighten the tone a bit, make occasional jokes. This book can get pretty dark and violent, so the footnotes are somewhat of a contrast, and they're not actually written in the writer's voice. The narrator in this book is a bit obscure, and whoever this narrator is, we hear these footnotes through their voice. And the narrator has a lot of personality. It's definitely not an objective narrator, which brings us to number 2, the viewpoint. The viewpoint of this book mostly stays with the main protagonist, Mia, but sometimes it switches. However, in any case, it's a different voice telling the story. It's not quite an omniscient narrator, but it's not really the main character's voice either. I hear that the narrator is revealed in the last book. For now, I can only speculate about it. The audiobook is read by a man, so I'm guessing that's to emphasize that it's not indeed Mia. But it does put some distance between you and the characters. I prefer to be in the character's mind, but this book is doing something deliberate and interesting with it. I suggest you try to enjoy the narrator's voice. It's a very particular, strong voice. The narrator has opinions, and some of their opinions are in the footnotes as short comments. But I think the most important problem people have with the narrator's voice is our third point: metaphors. Oh boy, does this book have metaphors. There are a lot of metaphors in this book, but the reason they're there is again because of the particular voice of this strange narrator. Mia herself is very direct. She's not the type of person who would speak in metaphors, but the narrator does. And most of the time the metaphors are funny. One of them is something like, her face was like a puzzle that anyone who looked at it would put it back into the box, or something like that. it means she's not very pretty. Another one was she kicked the guy, making sure he would never have children or something along those lines, meaning she kicked him in the balls. There is one recurring metaphor where one of the characters is referred as beautiful as a suicide or a fresh corpse. He's an albino. I guess the narrator has a twisted understanding of beauty. It's weird. Another says silence hung in the room like a traitor's corpse. So it's quiet. I kind of understand what the narrator means, but not really. But again, most of them are supposed to be funny in this particular narrator's voice. So if you approach them that way, I don't think they'll be as distracting as they can be, as in if you assume they're coming from the actual characters. Which brings us to our next point, stylized writing. This book is written in a very stylized way. It's obviously deliberate. The first chapters are the most stylized ones. The past and present events are given in the same chapter. Past events are written in italic. And they combine in a super cool, interesting way. You might get confused in the early chapters. Don't stop reading. Once you get to the school part, after 80 pages or so, things become more regular. Try to enjoy the early chapters, especially the first chapter, which is written in a remarkable way stylistically. I couldn't spoil it even if I tried. You have to experience it yourself. But as I said, it can be confusing to read. Just take the ride. But later in the book too, some action sequences have super short sentences, which sort of changes the pacing a bit, especially when Mia is using the shadows. I see that some people get annoyed by those things, but these are super trivial things, guys. They're just short sentences. It's fine. But on the other hand, your reaction isn't really odd. Jay Kristoff probably already had an agent when he wrote this book. If anyone wrote this book as their first novel, it would be extremely difficult to convince literary agents that this is actually good. I watch literary agents giving critique on YouTube, and they just stop reading books for the most trivial reasons. No wonder most of the debut novels getting published are extremely generic. Because people get stuck on the smallest things, but those same things could offer them a unique reading experience. So yeah, this book is written somewhat stylistically different from most books. But it's not that weird. It's not like an avant-garde writing style or something. You'll be fine. Just stick with it. Except for the last point. The last point is there's nothing we can do about, and it's sex and violence. This book is adult fantasy. It might feel like it could be YA because it has a young protagonist. I've seen some libraries put it in the YA section. It has graphic sex, it has torture, it has a lot of violence in it. It's an assassin school. So characters die. It would be odd to have 30 assassins in a room and then everyone makes it to the end. It's not like the Hunger Games or anything, but the characters will die. The teaching methods are also brutal, so you need to be ready for those things. If you don't like violence, this book is obviously not for you. I enjoy this book. I like that it has so much raw emotion in it. There is a lot of action. The whole last 10% of the book is a long action sequence. I have no idea how this hasn't been adapted yet. I'm sure it has been optioned. But BookTube's own Piera Forde was able to get permission from Jay Kristoff and made 3 short episodes for the first section of the book. I think she'll do more. I'll link that in the description too, so you can check them out after you read the book. They're really well made. So overall, it's not the most unique world. It doesn't have a lot of interesting lore or anything, at least not in the first book, but there are enough mysteries. There are very passionate characters. They can get really dark. The magic users are rare and the magic isn't explored quite a lot in this book, but there is magic in this world. Obviously, Mia has her shadow abilities, which are quite unique. Overall, I recommend you check this book out, and I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please leave a like to let me know. I would love to know your thoughts on this book in the comments. And if you'd like to see me talk about the next books in the series, don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and also I never mentioned, but we do have channel merch. I make these t-shirts myself, and I always link them in the description. So if you're interested, you can get them. And it doesn't even have to be t-shirts. You can get mugs and tote bags and pillows and all sorts of things. So if that's something you're interested in, don't forget to check them out. And other than that, see you next time.